All right, we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for dropping in the chat your plans for the weekend and also your predictions for the Super Bowl. Welcome to DA training. This is our district administrator training for our last one this week. So this is our finale. This is to cover our points or cover important points to make your smarter science and alternate testing success this spring, which I know it will be. My name is Abe Christ. I'm from the Performance Office. I am joined here by many of my colleagues. Oops, slide deck. Yeah, we will put that in the chat. Some of my colleagues in the Performance Office, in particular, Katie Seifert and Deirdre Ducharme, who will be presenting as well. And then also, I know some of my other colleagues are in the house here. Kim Johnson, Jeff Gregg, I think Michelle Rosado might be here, Christy Alberino. If I'm forgetting someone here, I'm sorry, but I think that for the most part, that's it. I'm also joined by some of my colleagues from Cambium, Jen Cho in particular. Jen is our program manager, and she's back again this year. She's been back for many years, and we're grateful to have her. Many of you probably know Jen. Jen's going to cover some of the Cambium assessment side things. A couple tips to make the presentation a success here. First of all, the slide deck is linked in the chat. I think Deirdre just dropped it in. Thanks, Dee. We are recording and posting this, so if you have to drop or you're multitasking or you like hearing us say the same things again, you can certainly run that recording back. We will send that out to all DAs probably next week. There will be several points during the webinar where we're going to stop, take a break. You can raise your hand, take you off. We'll take you off mute, and you can ask any questions. You can also drop them at the chat at that point. We are asking if you have a pressing issue, you can certainly drop it in the chat. We don't have the chat closed, but we're asking that try not to blow up the chat so it doesn't become a circus. If you do have questions, just hold off until the breaks. We'd really appreciate it. And if you don't get your answer, you can always email us at CT Student Assessment or any of your favorite members of the Student Assessment Office. We aren't scheduling any breaks. And again, thanks for attending the webinar. So the Performance Office, who are we? What do we do? We're here to talk just about student assessment and our smarter tests, science tests, and all tests, but we do a lot here. First of all, our data collections, we do all our reporting, our EdSite reporting, our research and analysis, and all our accountability reporting. There's lots of other projects too we also take care of, but these are the big goals of our office. We all report to our great Chief Performance Officer, Ajit Gopalakrishnan, who runs the show for us, and I'm sure many of you know Ajit too. So here's a snapshot of our office. If you need to get a hold of anybody from data collection, student assessment, EdSite, or the analysis psychometrics team, again, I think all of my colleagues in the student assessment office are on the webinar today or should be here soon. They're here as well. This is if you link to this slide, you can link to the email in the slide. The Cambium project team, here's all the contacts for the Cambium project team, in particular Jen Cho, the senior program director. Again, Jen's going to be here in a few minutes to cover some of the Cambium systems that are back again, but there are a few new things, and she's going to emphasize some important points. Some of you might be wondering if you're new, or even if you're not new, like, holy cow, there's CSDE, there's CAI, like, who do I contact when? Well, these would be the points when you would contact us, general policy questions, in particular accommodations and supports. Deirdre and Katie are unbelievable in their knowledge and wisdom about that, so you're going to reach out to us about that. Reporting of security breaches, and then that all-important CT-SEDS tide syncing. And here's our contact info, 6860-713-6860 is our number, and then our student assessment email address is here as well. And then when would you contact the Cambium Help Desk? Test administration procedural questions, testing with technology questions, and then if you have an issue with the secure browser, this is their help desk, both number and email. Again, if you are a new coordinator, I would be noting these things in the slide because we really do try to support you here in our office, and I know the Cambium team does a terrific job as well. So take these things down when you run into a snafu. We're here to support you. Okay, what are we going to talk about here today? First of all, quick overview. I'm going to run through a handful of slides, some new stuff, some stuff that you've probably seen over the years if you're a veteran coordinator. Just because we are assessment, we do need to repeat some things and just remind you how important some of the things we do here are. And then the Cambium overview, the Special POPs update, and then our alternate assessment update. All right, here is our assessment calendar for this year. This should not come as a surprise to you. If you're here today, really prime time starts for us on March 23rd and then runs to May 29th. We are currently in our ELP assessment window 2 right now. So, and we do start our NGSS assessments on February 2nd for the high school students, but the big part of the window begins on March 23rd. This shouldn't be new news to you. What should be new news to you is we recently put out our calendar for 26-27. So if you're doing planning for that year, that should be out there. And you can, if you link to this deck, there's links to that calendar in the actual deck. I don't know if Michelle is here. Let me see if Michelle is here. Michelle, if you are here, you're welcome to do this slide, but if not, I will. It doesn't look like Michelle made it, so I will take this slide. So we aren't here to talk about SAT today, but since SAT is a big part of the, we don't do SAT for grade 11 Smarter. We do want to tip our caps to this program. Just a reminder, the window is March 2nd to 30th. Just like in past years, schools can choose whichever dates you want to test students. You do not need to be tested on the same day, or all students. If you are a coordinator, note these trainings: the in-person training on February 3rd, and then the virtual training that's on February 4th. You can link on this deck and register. Resources and recorded webinars are on that SAT page. And then again, if you need anything SAT related, just hit up Michelle. She does a terrific job running the program. You can also hit up Deirdre, who does a great job supporting the program with her wisdom of accommodation supports. So if you have questions on those two topics, or in general, Michelle, accommodation supports, reach out to Deirdre. She knows a whole lot about that aspect of the test. Okay, so what's new and what is the same coming into this year? As we've said in years past, just because this assessment program now is in a point of ability that there's really more the same than new, which is a good thing. So you'll find that we're going to mention a few new things, but what is the same? First of all designated supports and accommodations, we're going to run those back. Those are the same. We're still doing our data sync between PSIS and CT SEDS. I do have to say that although it is the same, we've improved that sync. So a few years ago, we used to have like minor issues across the sync. Now, the number of issues we see are minuscule. So that's not to say that stuff doesn't happen, but usually if your student is not showing up with their supports in TIDE, there's a reason, and we're going to get to those in a few minutes. We're still using all the Cambium systems. We're still doing our office hours. Every year we get the question about, is there going to be a teacher training slide deck? We will be releasing this slide deck next week to you all, but in addition to this slide deck, we will be releasing a teacher training slide deck that's oriented more towards folks who are actually doing the test administration. So keep an eye out for those two resources. That's a popular item, and I know it's been every year. There's many of you that ask for that, so it's coming. Testing students out of state and non-approved facilities. That's still the same as in the past. There's a link on how to do that here. We are still doing the rolling release of results. So in May, we started doing rolling release about 4 years ago. And in May, you will see the CRS open with access to NGSS, ALTS, and all tests almost instantaneously, and then smarter tests that have been given up to that point, and then ones that are taken after the 15th, we ask for about a 10-day grace period before you see the results. But again, if kids took the test earlier in the window, say in April, you'll see their results in mid-May. So that's back again this year. For those of you that lean on the paper manuals, those are coming in late January, early February. And then the timing and the distribution of the ISRs, that's still in August, although we're trying to get earlier and earlier every year. So I want to say about the first week in August, you should see those landing in a box on your loading docks wherever you are. So one thing to mention though about that, and I'll preview what's new here, is that there is going to be a difference in the distribution of the ISRs because the number of boxes is not going to be as many as it has been in the past because we are only sending one copy now, not two copies. So for the last 100 years, we've been doing the 2-copy scenario. Now we're just doing 1 copy. And then in 2026, 27, 0.0 copies. So again, this is the last year of the paper distribution. Really kind of note that. And then 26, 27, we're not going to be sending them at all. We will be sending you a PDF to all the DAs. So don't panic and say, oh my God, what is the state doing? Getting rid of this nice, colorful, beautiful report. We're not getting rid of the report. It's just going to be through a PDF that we're going to send to you as DAs. And then finally, we always like to flag you all that we are asking TAs to affirm their training. I'm sorry, distracted by a chat here. Affirm their training through the attestation page that we're doing again. So in other words, if you're a TA and you set up a test session, you're going to get a box that says, it's a little more eloquently said than the following, but hey, have you been trained? And then you're going to answer yes. And you're also going to write you're literally going to type the word in summative to initiate the test, just to confirm you're doing a summative test. All right, enough about the same. Let's talk a little bit about the new. Tide has a new look. So if you log into Tide, you'll see that it's got a new cover essentially. But you know, the way we've equated this change is that this is really more of a change of the book cover or a change in the model of the car. So we're going from the 2011 Honda Accord to the 2012 Honda Accord. It's a new model, but it's essentially it drives the same. The blinkers are in the same place, so on and so forth. So it might take a little extra time to kind of navigate and refamiliarize yourself with it, but you'll see that the Tide is new. As we always have every year, please flag your tech coordinators. There's a new secure browser, so don't try testing without a new secure browser. You'll have lots of fun trying to figure that out. So update your secure browser. And then our assessment calendar. This is our 26, 27 calendar that we're planning. One thing to flag too, we now have in the 26, 27 calendar our K3 assessments, which our office is also charged with overseeing. So you'll see that now appears on that calendar as well. Next thing is the change in alert notifications. In the past, when a student has written something alarming or inappropriate on an open-ended item, the process generally has been CAI notifies us and then we notify you. Now there's a system that CAI has built where you're going to get a notification that'll force you to Oh, I see a little props for that. Thanks, Alec. Um, you'll get a notification. It's going to ask you to log into a system and acknowledge the receipt of this text that the student wrote. And the reason we take this seriously about sort of getting the acknowledgement and annoying you about this is, some of these things, 50% of the time, maybe the students are being silly, and it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but there is a percentage of time where there's alarming things that are written. We want to make sure you are alerted so you can take appropriate action or use whatever means that you all have in the local level to check in with these students to make sure they're okay. So again, there's a link here. Watch out for them. If you don't acknowledge it, we will then be stepping in and saying, hey, Abe, why didn't you acknowledge that? Can you just please let us know? So on and so forth. There's a change in the ESR system. I'm going to let Katie and Deirdre handle that, but if you do anticipate any ESRs that haven't been run yet, you're gonna have to be aware of this. So make a note and stay tuned for Katie and Deirdre's update later in the presentation. As I mentioned before, there's only one copy of the ISR reports coming, not two. One copy in this August, 0 in 2027. I think I covered that on the prior one. And then the next two things are, we actually have a couple slides on the test administration review and the scale initiative. Just a note too about these two things, we did about the admin review and then the scale initiative, we did send a note to supers, I believe on Wednesday night, just so they're aware of it. But really, this is the first time we've said anything about these last two new things. So if you're multitasking, take 3 minutes and listen to the next couple slides, hopefully you listen to them. So first off, what is the test administration review? The TAR, or another acronym we're throwing at you, is really a project or an effort where we're going to be reviewing and improving test administration practices with our Connecticut districts and educators through observations, interviews, and data analysis. Why are we doing this? Simply put, we're doing this to improve our assessment system. So we want to get better. We want to make the process better for you all, for students. So we're going through this process. Of course, there are other reasons like federal peer review. For those of you that don't already know this, we do have to hop through some hoops at the federal level with our assessments. Basically, that we're meeting these requirements at the federal level for summative assessments, and one of them is this monitoring section that we reference here, section 2.4, and then also just the testing standards, the national testing standards, standard 6.1 references the importance of this. So a little bit more about this. Who is doing this? We're working with CCERC, which is a team of researchers from UHeart and UConn that have been tasked to join us to conduct this work. If you don't know CCERC, it's a collaborative that we've been working with that has undertaken a bunch of research projects, timely research in education in Connecticut, and they've done some amazing work. If you hit this link here, if you like research, they've done some really neat stuff on a multitude of items. Like, for instance, they've studied, I know, remote learning, they've studied high dosage tutoring, and there's many other research projects. So we're going to be working with the CCERC team, and we'll be developing protocols, conducting the site visits, data analyzation, and creating reports, again, to improve our systems. When is this being done? At the start of the testing window. So watch out for contacts over the next few months from the research team and CSDE. All right, so the next new item is the SCALE initiative. And unlike that first item where we're going to be asking you to join us and there's really no option, it's not an option. This is an optional professional development, so do not feel obligated to join this, although this should be a pretty amazing effort. So we do encourage you to jump on, but this is optional. But what is SCALE? It's a statewide professional learning and coaching program to help improve assessment literacy and sensible assessments in the state. And why are we doing this? We're actually under Public Act 2493. We're required to develop and implement a program for professional learning on assessment literacy. So that's really driving this. And it will be started off by really looking at the audits that you all provided. And when I say you all, we know that every single district was we're grateful that provided the audits last spring. And we're going to take a look at that and kind of go from there to talk about balanced assessment systems and improving assessment literacy. So who's doing this work, you might be wondering. Not necessarily the Performance Office. We're going to be working with the Center for Assessment, which is a organization out of New Hampshire that consults on, it's actually an amazing organization out of New Hampshire that consults and works with states all throughout the country on standardized assessment projects and efforts. They provide a lot of technical knowledge on assessments, and they've written books on sensible assessment. And so we'll be working with the center as well as the RESTs. We're also partnering with the REST to develop and implement SCALE. When is this happening? Certain aspects are beginning in the next, or imminently, so watch out for communication about that. And it will be actually carrying on. It's a multi-year effort. It'll be carrying on into 27, 28. More information on the program will be distributed in the next month, so keep an eye out for it. And again, as I mentioned to you in the previous slide, this has not been promoted other than the superintendent note that came out from our commissioner, that comes out periodically to our superintendents. I believe it was Wednesday evening. Other than that, we haven't said anything. We've obviously said it at our other workshop. So actually, it was Tuesday night. I stand corrected, not Wednesday night. So Tuesday night, it would have come to your supers, and we haven't said anything other than our workshops this week. All right, let's keep on rolling. So enough of the same new. I'm going to cover an array of items now. Some of these are repeats if you're veterans, but really it's incumbent on us to mention these items because they are very important. The first thing here being our participation policy. What is our participation, or what's driving participation, is really, we can thank, the reason we're all here this morning is because of 10-14N. 10-14N is the Connecticut statute that drives our assessments. We often recommend that if you need to lean on some backing as far as explaining to your parents or guardians or community about the need for the assessments, this is often what we fall back on if you don't already know this. And then also one of the requirements included in ESSA is the state level cap of 1% on the number of students tested in a subject area participating in the alternate assessment. While it is important for Connecticut to monitor and adhere to this federal guidance from the USED, we're committed to serving our students and choosing the right assessment for students, and not necessarily the 1% doesn't drive everything, but in order to choose those right assessments, Katie and Deirdre have created lots of guidance and support off this link, and we really encourage you to take a look at this because, again, we are being monitored at the federal level on this 1% cap. Okay, changing gears, the PSIS TIDE CT-SEDS data sync. Say that 5 times, good luck. So the PSIS TIDE data sync. District administrators, you all must be working with your PSIS coordinators to ensure that accurate data is in TIDE. Whatever is in PSIS registration is pulled in every night into TIDE, and that is really the source of our data. We get calls all the time and emails saying, oh my gosh, why isn't this student in Tide? He or she is in PSIS, and I have to say 99.9% of the time we go back to PSIS and the student isn't correctly identified in PSIS. So as long as the student is correctly entered in the registration module, you're good to go. You'll see the student in Tide the following day. Also, students identified as eligible for services for ELML, IDEA, or Section 504 must have the demographic fields indicated in PSIS. And that's very important because, again, we're going to touch on this in a few minutes, but if your IDEA indicator or your Section 504 indicator is not set, you're not going to sync into Tide from CT SEDS. That's one of our sort of filters. So be mindful that it's set correctly in PSIS. So all these are the same as last year, so don't panic. There's entirely too much text on this slide, but here's what it has to say. So first of all, we loaded all the testing demographics from PSIS to Tide from Freeze0 in November. Keep in mind that the values for recently arrived ELs and MLs in Section 504 were not pulled from Freeze0, so those must be manually entered, or bulk. You can bulk enter them into the registration module by your PSIS coordinator. As it's noted here, if Section 504 is not set in PSIS, accommodations cannot sync from CT SEDS to Tide. Then here are all the snapshot dates. These are the dates that basically you'll see that it's at the end of each of these windows where we take a data snapshot from PSIS, and that drives our future reporting. So make sure everything is tight by then. A couple odds and ends here. Students who are repeating grades, they should still be tested. The student grade in PSIS is the grade that drives the testing for the student. And then finally, grade 11 skippers are not tested. What we mean by that, if for science, if students magically go from grade 10 to 12 credit-wise and thus are not pulled into Tide, we don't follow up on that. Obviously, if we saw high school one year where there was no grade 11 kids, we might scratch our heads and say something is not right here. But at the micro level, we're not coming after districts that have a clump of students who aren't tested because they skipped grade 11. Okay, this chart assists if students change status for special ed, EL, ML, or free reduced lunch during testing. I would take a hold of this and put it aside. And when you have these occasions come up, we recommend you take a look at this before calling us, because this really addresses all the types of flavors of status changes during testing. Okay, the CT SEDS Tide data sync. Again, we started doing this a few years ago. Here's a couple really important things to make this a success. And I would say the majority of issues that we see, if you can make sure to address these things, you're good to go. First thing is the student's current grade and all grades covered during the duration of the plan must be in the plan, and that plan must be finalized and implemented before that's finalized and implemented before it transfers into Tide. So keep that in mind. If you're not seeing something show up in Tide, you might want to check CT SEDS. As far as the alternate assessment indicator, that will be activated for students who complete the eligibility form for the student's current grade in CT SEDS. So that has to be done, and then the flag goes up in Tide. And then generally, we do this update daily, but we ask that you give about 24 to 48 hours after the finalization and implementation date, and you should see them. And then one other note here: you should please do not manually update accommodations for students with an IEP or a Section 504. All right, changing gears once again, test security. Please be mindful of this. Nothing new here other than please treat this really with care and professionally. This is obviously a state standardized assessment. We want to keep it standardized and fair for all students. So all these items here, I'm not going to belabor them. Please alert your staff that this type of thing shouldn't be done. We do have more comprehensive lists in the TAMs that you can take a look at, but really be careful. Just a reminder that this is the state assessment. Again, here's another slide with way too much text on it, but just a reminder that this is straight out of the TAM. This is a reminder to test administrators that, you know, the consequences of any cheating or so forth that might happen. So please be aware of this. Again, I say this at every DA workshop. The worst part of our job is having to deal with situations when these arise, which they have, and we don't want to take those calls. So please stem those off and follow the guidance in the TAMs, and you'll be good to go. Here's the confirmation attestation page again. So if you're a TA, you're logging in to start a test session. You're gonna be asked to click OK here. So I've been trained. And then also type the word summative into this box. So, and you might be asking, gosh, this is such a silly thing to do, but this really is our way of confirming that, okay, since we have both interims and summatives in through the CAI system, this makes sure that we are giving the summative and not an interim. All right, we're almost, I'm on the last quarter lap here, so we're almost done with this initial section. Improprieties, irregularities, and breaches. So despite what we might say in the previous slides, stuff happens, right? We are humans, things happen in schools, we recognize that. So here are the scenarios that we would categorize issues that pop up in a school. So a low-level incident is an impropriety, mid-level is an irregularity, and a breach level is the highest level. I'm not going to go through every, like the dot points here necessarily about what to do. The one I would really note is if you have a breach, and again, you might be asking, well, what's a breach, Abe? If you look at Appendix G of the Test Coordinator's Manual that's linked here, we have like a list of the most popular flavors of test security issues. It doesn't represent the universe necessarily, but I would say the most popular ones. If you ever have a breach, find someone in the student assessment office as soon as you can. Call them, drive to 450 Columbus, text them, whatever, find them on Instagram, find them, because we really want to know those as soon as possible. Here's our number, our email. I know many of you interact directly with some of us very frequently. Just reach out to us immediately and say, Abe, you know, I got a major security issue in my school. Can you please help us out? How do you wiggle out of these scenarios? These are all the appeals. If you've been doing this in the past, these are not new. These are the same ones we've used for the last couple of years. Typically, we only use the reopen a test segment and the grace period extension. We don't use resets and validations too much. But again, recognizing that we are going to make mistakes, things happen. These are the way that you can get around these things that happen in schools. Tips for entering appeals. Make sure whoever's entering the appeals are trained. They know what's going on. They provide information in the entry box. That helps us understand, okay, all right, you know, there's a fire drill, there was so many kids, this is what happened. If you just enter the appeal with no context, it's going to start a chain reaction of, we're going to email you, ask for more information, yada, yada, yada. We can really, we can address this through the appeals system exclusively. So please, please enter these judiciously. I see some hands going up. Alec, I think I just saw your hand. So for those of you that joined late, we're going to take breaks several times during this presentation. We will breathe, let you raise your hand. You can ask your questions via the audio, or you can chat in. I know I think we've been trying to answer some of them now. We're really trying to guide people toward those few breaks. So Alec, about 3 more slides and you're on deck. So then the reopen or grace period extension, just those are not to be handed out like candy for students to just go back in a test and check things out. If a student had a legitimate situation where maybe they started a test, they got rushed off to a unpredicted dentist appointment, their test expired, we'll do a reopen or a grace period extension. But where we get worried is we see large swaths of reopens and grace period extensions in school. We're gonna scratch our head and say, wait a second, this doesn't look correct. So please be careful with those. Not necessarily be careful, just use them not just to go back into test sessions to check things out. And you don't know what to do, email us, call us. I've listed my colleague, Christy Alberino, does an awesome job managing all our appeals. She does 99.9% of them. And Christy, you can call or email Christy, and but you can also, if she's snowed in with appeals on a day, you can check in with us too, and we can usually help you out too. If you enter an appeal with an accommodation issue, it's probably pretty likely that Christy's going to ask for some documentation. Be prepared to provide that. Again, here are the things that we're going to ask for. We're not going to go through every single thing, but whether it's you or at the school level, we're going to ask for that. And then we're almost done here. Recommended testing times. These are the suggested times for ELA and math. Some of the districts over the years have been testing much more than the suggested time for each test. While it's not a time test, and students may need more time than suggested, just monitor this closely so it's not abused. Extra time does not necessarily relate to improved achievement, and we've seen some ridiculously high times over the years where we've had to flag districts and make some calls and communications saying, hey, what's going on here? So just be careful that it is untimed. Do what you have to do, but don't go on for hours and hours. NGSS can be administered in 1 or even 2 consecutive days. The recommended testing time is at least 90 minutes for testing, with an additional 10 provided to read the directions. Remember also, the pause rule has a 20-minute timer that starts running. So if a student resumes the test within 20 minutes, they can review previously answered questions. After 20 minutes, they cannot review previously answered questions. They can only work on unanswered questions. This is important because if you keep this 20 minutes in your mind, it will eliminate some downstream appeals. If you're going to have to stop, like there's a fire drill or something, with some luck, you're back in quickly. If you start within 20 minutes, you're good to go and you can kind of finish the session. Granted, if the students are excited and not ready to go back in, we're not suggesting you have to do that. But if they are ready to go, jump back in testing within 20 minutes, let's make it happen. That way you don't have to do an appeal. All right, last slide, just some reminders. Instructional materials must be covered. Please be mindful of that. This isn't new news. If you have any doubt about any instructional materials, just cover it. When in doubt, cover it. Find New York Times, find some, I know they don't have those too much in paper anymore, but find a Sunday New York Times and cover whatever it is, or whatever creative solutions at your school, take them down. Just be mindful of that. If it's going to help students out during the test, that's going to cause a problem. Ensure spacing is appropriate. Prepare the test setting so students have what they need. Make sure students have an opportunity to practice tests and they have exposure to universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations if they're using them. Make sure that students have the scrap paper for their tests. We get this question all the time too. Can you use plain paper, line paper, patty paper, graph paper? Yes, that's okay. Patty paper has surged in popularity over the years. I'm not exactly sure why, but we get that question frequently, so that can be used. You also need to distribute graph paper for students in 6, 7, and 8 for math. And then headsets are required for ELA listening too. Okay. That does it for the overview. I have not been keeping up with that. I'll just assume that we're good to go. Alec, I think you were the one. Here, Alec, I'm going to take you off mute and you can cite your question. And then if anybody else has any questions, you can raise your hands. I think we would appreciate that method, excuse me, as opposed to blowing up the chat. It's just easier that way. Alec, you should be good to go.
Thank you, Abe. My question is regarding appeals. And by the way, a big shout out to Christy Alberino. If you folks ever get a chance to talk to her, it is a pleasure. Ask her about her Easter pie recipe. The question that I have, Abe, and it's kind of something that comes up with us being on the larger side. The appeals process, we do channel through kind of central office, myself and somebody who works with me. Is there a way to turn off the ability of others, for example, school test coordinators, to file appeals? Typically, the times we get into issues is when somebody sees a situation, they panic, they go in, they appeal, they probably select the wrong appeal because they don't fully understand the name. And then we end up having to clean up the situation. I know the school test coordinator role gives a lot of permissions, and if this isn't available now, maybe this is a future feature request. But I would love the ability to maybe have a role that is a school test coordinator without the ability to appeal or with the ability to appeal.
Okay. Yeah, I see Jen came on here, but I'll give my 2 cents here. Thanks for the shout out to Christy, and I'll be asking about the Easter pie too. But right now, yes, we allow like school level folks to enter appeals just to provide the flexibility. I don't know now that the roles are customizable by that level, but I don't know, Jen, that's something. Again, I think we just allow it for flexibility, and it might have to be something, Alec, that you have to address in training if you want to flow it through a central place, which I can appreciate. Jen, do you have any wisdom on that?
Yeah, and this is something, Abe, we would probably have to talk about afterwards and maybe consult with some of the districts. So right now, every school coordinator can file appeal. That's just kind of the feature that is allowed there. There are options, that we could take. We could make a rule that no school coordinator can file an appeal. Whether or not that hurts some districts and causes, other districts to be happy, we'll have to weigh the pros and cons on that. The other thing is we could create another school coordinator role, like you said, one that could do appeals, one that cannot. I kind of caution about having way too many user roles, because then people get confused as to which one should work and can work, and you don't want to have so many user roles that people just get confused by them. But there are some options. We can talk it over internally to see what would best work for the state.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for the question, Alec, and thank you for doing what you do too. You're giving shout outs to Christy and our team, but I know you do a great job down in Stanford too. So thanks. All right. Any other questions?
Abe, if I can just jump in real quick, there are a number of accessibility and accommodation related questions in the chat. I prefer waiting to respond once we get into that section of the presentation. So I just want our colleagues to know that we're not ignoring you, but your questions are great, but we're going to be covering this content very shortly.
I think that's a great idea. Thanks, Dee. Yeah. Joanna, I'm going to take you off mic. You're good to go. You'll have to unmute yourself. Can you try again? All right, sorry about that, Joanna. If that's not working, it should, but if you want to chat in your question, although we didn't trying to shy away from that. That's fine too. I apologize. So if you Lydia, I'm going to looks like you should be able to just take yourself off mute now.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Just a quick question on the students' individual score reports coming out, just the one copy of the paper this year and no copies for the future. There's a question in the chat. Are we still obligated to share that information with parents? So is the anticipation that we're printing those out and sending them home as districts, or are we just to let families know that we have that information available?
Yeah, I mean, as far as sharing, yes. I mean, the provision, the reason we've shared it is because that the expectation is that you share it with parents as well, because I can't imagine if you didn't, what would happen, quite frankly, but maybe your school is unique in that. But yes, that you flip them from, we don't have, unfortunately, a mechanism where we have like that level of access to parents. I know states actually have that. We do not yet, so we really rely on you to distribute them from your perspective. And again, but that's where how you do that is really up to you. We're going to provide you the PDFs, and whether you print them up somehow or you distribute them electronically. I know. I want to say, I'm just making up numbers here, but I would say 30 to 40% of districts are already doing this electronically. So if you haven't figured that out, certainly give me a call afterwards and I can help you out on some ideas, because there's a lot of districts that have successfully used like these parent distribution tools to do that in a pretty slick way.
Oh, great. I'll definitely reach out. Thank you so much.
I'll drop my email, Lydia, into the chat. Feel free to drop me a line maybe after the workshop today.
Great. Thank you.
Abe, if I can just jump in, Joanna did message her question, and she wants to know if there's feasibility for adding a secondary individual for the alert notification. And I know this has been a popular question at our other DA trainings this week. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Thanks. Yeah, I see it now. So Joanna, right now, is there going to be? So going to be, there isn't right now. Like, we have no mechanism to add someone, but I know Jen, who's been at all of our workshops, has been hearing this, and this has been a common question. So there is, you're not the only one. There's been the thought that we were going to add all the DCs, like, without a problem. But the problem is many districts have many DCs. So then the DA is going to get an alert, and then the 19 DCs are going to get an alert. So we don't have a systematic way to add you easily right now, but that's definitely on our to-do list. As far as a concern about not getting it, you can trust that if it's a serious alert, we'll find you. So because Christy and myself, who generally do that, so if you don't get the notification, and I think some of you know this too, you've probably gotten calls on a Sunday afternoon walking through Hammonasset, and you're like, why are you calling me, Abe? And we're like, well, we saw an alert that you should be aware of. So at the moment, if you don't get the alert, we will get you. And yes, we are thinking about a way to add folks, but right now, the DC option we're shying away from, because that would just create chaos. Sorry, that was an entirely long answer for probably a simple issue. So we're working on it, would be a little better.
Abe, I'm just going to drop a link in the chat from our May 28th presentation. It was a webinar with a focus on the individual student report electronic distribution. So
cool.
If any of our administrators are interested in what that process might look like based on the electronic tools districts are currently using, you are welcome to view that recording, and it is posted to the training page on our website. So just bear with me for a moment and I'll get that in there.
And thanks, Dee, I appreciate it. I think we'll kick it to Jen now. I just real quick, Elise, you had asked about whiteboards and markers. I think we've typically allowed this and Dee, I might be stepping on your toes here if you guys are going to hit this. But I'm sorry if I'm stepping in on this one. Like, we've typically allowed this, but one things we caution about the use of whiteboards and markers is that it's, it really should be something that the students are typically using. So this is not like all of a sudden for the state test they're using this. And the other thing we found is it's sometimes harder to systematically use those than it is to use like the scratch paper. But to answer your question, yes, you can, but just be kind of mindful about those risks.
And Abe, I would just thank you for addressing that. I recommend that you review the CSDE assessment guidelines. We'll reference that in the link shortly, but we do have some recommendations regarding the use of a whiteboard. So just pay attention to that information in the CSDE assessment guidelines. Thank you.
Thanks, Dee. All right, Jen, I'm going to kick it to you. I'll advance the slides for you.
Okay, thank you. So welcome everyone. I am Jen Cho, the program director at CAI, who's been on the Kinetic account since the start. So I think we were counting at 12 administrations. Happy to be back. Happy to see everyone virtually. Happy to also see people on Wednesday who are there as well. So good to be on this program. Like Abe said, we don't have a lot of new things this year besides the total complete UI change for Tide, which is kind of what we want because we know it's busy. We don't, want to make lives difficult and things like that. So everything pretty much will stay the same. There is one important slide I do want everyone to pay attention to, and I will highlight that as we get through the slide deck. So as always, all the information resources for anything regarding the summative statewide testing will be on the assessment program portal. Link this if you haven't, but any information regarding how to access any of the system, our user guides, our resources, our links to the system will be at the site. In addition, if you haven't already, you can also sign up to get email notifications anytime we make an update to the portal. So we do send one notification in the afternoon if we've made updates to the portal that day. So if you haven't signed up for those announcements, please do so. Next slide. Okay, Abe mentioned this. I know this was a question in the chat. The secure browser. We have updated the desktop secure browsers and deployed them in the fall of 25. So I just wanted to let you know that if you are working off desktop browsers such as Windows or Mac, please make sure those are updated. If you are right now actively taking interims with the secure browser, you should be all set. But if you haven't started any kind of testing preparation, please do make sure you have the most updated secure browsers. Secure browsers, again, are needed for most summative testing, including Smart Balance, NGSS, CTAA, and CALP. This is the slide I do want everyone to pay attention to. I believe when we ran the numbers at the end of the last administration, 90% of the tests taken in Connecticut were using Chromebooks. So it's a very highly popular device that's being used, and we do want to highlight this one important update for this year. So in the past, we've had an app called the Secure Test Browser Chrome app that was running in kiosk mode. But Google this year deprecated that, and so we had to create a new app called the Progressive Web App PWA Secure Browser. We have gotten some calls throughout the fall, especially when interim testing started, where students were logging in and getting an error, and that had to do with installation issues with the PWA application. So we created this troubleshooting guide. It is on the portal, But we do want to make sure that before you do summative testing, that if you are using Chromebooks, you have this app installed, that everything is working correctly. So I would send a slide, a screenshot it. We'll also provide the slide deck later on. Send that to the tech coordinator. Make sure they're aware of it. Make sure that the Chromebooks are installed with the correct app, as well as making sure that the installation steps are correct as well. Not saying it's a widespread issue. We have seen a couple. I would like to prevent as much testing issues as possible. So please just be mindful of this slide. Okay. Like always, one user account in our system can access all different systems that we offer. So your user account will allow you to access the TA interface, the CRS, the reporting system, AVA, the DEI, as well as the Smart Balance tools for teacher. For security reasons, we do reset passwords when we roll over the accounts in September. So if you have not logged into the system yet, you will be asked to reset your password. In addition, if this is the first time you're logging in, or if you're logging in every, I believe it's 60 days, 60 or 90 days, we will send you a code through your email. This is just to make sure that we are confirming this is you. This is part of the security stringent requirements that we're following to make sure our systems are definitely secure and that we have no bad actors getting into the system. This was implemented last year. Just want to remind you that our password policy is more stringent. There are more requirements, especially the one where you can't use the same password, or it has to be different from the last 24 passwords. We do maintain our ISO 2007 certification, security certification. In order to be able to maintain that certification, there are requirements that we do have to follow, including this, just to make sure that all our systems are secure. Okay, going into Tide, and I'm going to spend most of my slides on the system. It is the system that's the most popular system. Pretty much every user is going to be in the system doing something. So as mentioned before, what you can do in Tide, we want to make sure that, users are there. You want to make sure your student demographic information is correct for that student. You want to make sure that the students' test settings and tools are all there before testing. We want to make sure that sync between CT's heads is happening. So if you don't see correct information there, please let the help desk know. As mentioned before, when we were talking about appeals, you can submit appeals through the system, any of the Tide forms that Katie and Deirdre are going to mention, as well as creating rosters, ordering booklets, and running participation reports. So like I said, lots of activities you can do in Tide. This is probably a system that every user is pretty much going to go in. So we spend most of our time going through this system and providing updates. As a reminder, I kind of briefly mentioned this before. If your student needs to take a test, any of the summative tests, they need to be in the Tide system. Without being in Tide, we will not be able to verify their enrollment. They would not be able to log into a test. So if you see missing students in Tide, please contact your PSIS coordinator to get that resolved. In addition, users who are going to proctor tests for the summative test also need to be in Tide. So you do need to make sure that all your teachers who are going to be proctoring a summative assessments have a user account in Tide. Okay, as mentioned before by Abe, Tide, what's new? It looks completely different. If you haven't logged into the system, please do so. If you have logged into the system, hopefully it's not new anymore. But I do know that when I first saw it, it was completely a shock, given that the fact that the old Tide has been there for almost a decade. And one of the reasons why we did it was because it was probably time to update that system. We had done focus groups across the country, including schools in Connecticut, to see if we were going to make an update to Tide, what would be the things people want to see. And sort of the consensus was less clicks. There was just too many clicks to get everywhere. There's way too much information. As you know, Tide does a lot of things. And so less clicks would have been, people had wanted less clicks so that they could easily access the feature, the system that they needed, the task they needed to do. So the new look, this is what we call our card-based layout. Each of the different tasks are in their own cards to make it easy to see and know where things are. Next slide. But if you absolutely hate that card-based layout, we actually have what's called a list-based layout that you can toggle to. And this is going to have the same look and feel as our old system, just everything's in a list, not in boxes, and it will allow you to be able to search, to let you find what you need to do. So you can have each view, depending on what your preference is. In addition to that, one of the things that we were told is that the task needed to be more center, more focused. It was kind of too busy all over the screen. So what we've done with each of our tasks is to center the task so that it shifts the focus to the center. You're not looking at the whole screen, you're looking at the center. This is an image of the Create Appeals. So you'll see that the actual module is in the center and not kind of running throughout the page. In addition to that, in our quest to make less clicks happen for users, we've added descriptions to the right-hand side. So in the past, if you were filing an appeal, you didn't know which appeal to use, you would have to click on a tooltip or open a user guide to figure out what the different appeal options were. Now we have all that information on the right side. So hopefully users will be able to read what's there and be able to pick the one most appropriate for their student and be able to submit the appeal without having to do too many clicks or look for the information at different places. This is another new feature, a custom view. So you can now customize how you want TIE to look, especially when you're retrieving information from the students, such as users or students. If you do retrieve student information, you can elect to hide columns. If you decide that you don't want gender, you don't want birth date, that's not relevant to what you need to do, you can hide it and only allow the columns you want to see and export to a spreadsheet. In addition to that, we allow customizations of the grid view. So if you need the text to be bigger, you need it to be smaller, you need the contrast to be more enhanced or not, the lines to be lighter or darker, you can certainly do that. You do not have to choose whatever your colleagues choose. This is your custom view and you can customize it to what your preferences are. Again, just want to show you another look and feel, which is the student dashboard. Again, in kind of keeping with the trend, the task is in the center. We have the text on the right. And before, everything for that student was on the same page. You would just have to scroll down to after the demographic information to get to student settings, to get to the participation information. We now have everything in tabs so that if you look at the top part of the screenshot, you'll see that everything is in tabs. We have one for student demographics, student settings, participation, eligibility, and history. So hopefully it's easier to navigate. We do want this to function well for users given how many users are in the system. Another feature that we have is you can customize favorites. So if you are a user who's only doing appeals, or you're running one particular participation reports, or you just want to order paper materials, you can favorite that task. And what it will do is it will appear at the top of the banner on the right-hand side. So in the future, when you log in, all those favorited tasks will be there at the banner. You can just go there instead of going to the dashboard to look for what you need. I talk about this every year, and I'm going to talk about it again because it is an important feature for testing, and this is the participation reports. So we have 6 different participation reports in the system, and just want to go over a couple of them. These are important because as you get through the testing window, you will want to make sure that your students have completed the test. A couple weeks before the testing window ends, the state will also run participation reports, and you'll get an email from Abe if your participation reports are not high or your percentages are not high. So please monitor this. We don't want any surprises at the end of the window. This will allow you to track test progress throughout the window. So the first report, again, test completion rates. This is going to be your high level report. It is synced up once a day. So all you have to do is run it once a day. If you run it 5 times, it's going to give you the same results. And these are going to be percentage reports. So if you want to see how your school is doing by test, you can run this test completion rate report. You can do it at the school or the district level. And this is just going to give you a high level view of how testing is going. So at the beginning of the window, you might see 0%, 5% testing. In the middle of the window, you might see 20%, 30% testing. But by the end of the window, you do want to see those completion rates, those percentages at the high 90s, 99%, 98%. And those are the ones the states will be tracking. So if you are under a certain percentage, they will be calling you to remind you that testing is going to end soon and you need to make sure that every student takes the test. Test session status report. I've been told by many DAs that this is their favorite report. It's a very granular report. You can run it at the district or school level. This report is dynamic. So anytime you run it throughout the day, it will change based on testing that has happened during the day. So if you, what you can do is run a report by each assessment, and it will give you a report of every student who's eligible for that assessment and their test status, as well as other information such as school ID, result ID. So if you know that like your testing percentage is 95%, you're trying to figure out who that remaining 5% is, a test status code report is a great report to run. You can then run the report for all the students in the school, sort out who hasn't yet started to test, and be able to pinpoint which students have yet to take the test and remind the school. So this is a very detailed level report. We've been told it's a fan favorite. So just make sure that you are aware of this report. Plan managed testing. I go through this. I don't really know how many people actually use it because it is such a fine-tuned report. But if you want to be able to track how many students tests are going to expire in 5 days, how many students haven't yet started to test, this is going to be that report. And this report also includes test times as well. So if you also want to see, how long it's been taking students to take a test, this is the report for you as well. So plan managed testing, we do have a basic set of searches. These are some canned, pre-canned reports you can generate that like gives you who still needs to test, who has a pause test. All that information will be there. If you want something a little bit more detailed, if we go to the next slide, we have what's called the advanced search screen. And this allows you to provide more information that you want. If you want to search by teacher, you can certainly do that. If you want to know what tests are going to expire by a certain day, you can do that as well. So this is just this is more if you need to investigate something that's going on, this is a great report to use because it does allow you to be able to narrow down your search criteria for specific information that you are looking for. In addition to the advanced search, and this is something new from last year, you can save it. So if there's a report you like to run every day, you have a couple of requirements that you put in, you can save that report. And if we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see that save function is there. And then you, instead of going to the advanced search, you can go to your favorites and regenerate that report. So this is what it would look like if you were to favorite one of your PMT reports. And the last one is the test progress summary dashboard, also new last year. This is a visual representation of the test completion rate reports. If you just want to quickly see how schools are doing per assessment, this is that report. You can see right now in this screenshot, everything is a gray bar because no one has taken a test. But as you get through the testing window, you do want to see the bar become more and more green because it shows that more and more students are completing the test. So you can see for one of these assessments, we have a bar, we have active testing going on. This is for the interim ICAs. The green is those who have taken and completed the test. Yellow are pause tests. Gray has not started. You can generate this by school, by grade, by assessment, any kind of criteria that you want. But if you do just want to see, I know it's busy every day. You may not want to run a test status code report, but this allows you to visually see where your schools are in terms of test progress. And one little tiny update for our test delivery interface. We just want to let you know that we did update the strike through tool. In the past, if a student struck out an option, it would only really put a line through the first line of that answer option. And now we have a tool that just provides diagonal lines to cover the entire selected option, so it's not confusing to the student. Any questions? I think I saw a couple in the chat.
Jen, do you want to,
Yeah.
You want to address the chat questions, and then it looks like we have Alec is back. So Alec, if you can hang for a sec.
So I think the first question is, are there instructions for the new dashboard? Not particularly to the dashboard, but there is a user guide that does address everything in Tide. So if you have a question about all the different features in Tide, I would encourage you to go to the portal, download the Tide user guide, and it should have every information that you need regarding what to do in Tide. So there is a question on secure browser. So if yes, so the secure browser is out there, up to date. If you are already doing interim testing right now with the secure browser, you are good to go. And the reason why I say with the secure browser, because you can actually do take the interim assessments with the internet browser like Chrome. So I just want to make sure that you are good to go for the summative assessments if you're right now taking interim assessments with the secure browser. Yes, for the Chrome OS, we do recommend that you lock down the Chrome OS, especially before the summative test window. We actually recommend doing it at the beginning of the school year, just so that you're done and nothing has to change or anything like that. If you don't lock it down and Chrome, Google pushes out a new operating system, we won't disallow you to take the test, but we have seen problems occur with a new operating system. We are trying to test it to make sure, everything works with our system, but I would just caution and say, I have seen some issues with the newer browsers that get pushed. So if you can lock down your operating system before testing, that would be ideal. Has a dense strike through appeared in the IABs already? Yes. So we deployed this when the interims went live in the fall.
Thanks, Jen. Alec, you should be able to unmute and.
Yep. Thank you so much, Abe. One question, one comment. One of the things I do is I compile the current year's manuals and documentation for my school test coordinators. And while the lion's share of the manuals have been updated to 25-26, there are a few that are still in the 24-25 version. I know the changes usually aren't very drastic, but is there a date by which we do have an expectation? Two of the call outs that I so far noticed is the CTAA test administration manual seems to be in last year's version, and the NGSS test administration manual seems to be in the 24-25 version.
Yeah, we will check that. I believe they should have been posted there for the reason that they're all printed and they're all going out to the districts right now. They're all being shipped for receipt end of next week. So if it's the TAMs, then we'll double check that. But the latest ones, they're all ready. So we'll just double check to make sure they're there.
Awesome, thank you. And the kind of follow up is you mentioned the Google Chrome OS version. So I think since probably 2 years ago now, we are on the long-term support channel, LTS.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And from what I understand, most districts have kind of switched to that. It's just too painful to jump between.
Correct.
Are you fully hope? Do you see any issues if that's what we're on? Because I don't want to get off of that.
We want people to be on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks, Alec. All right. Any other questions for Jen, before we move on to Katie and Dee on designated supports, accommodations, and alternate assessments.
Abe, there is a question in the chat that doesn't pertain to any of the content that we've covered thus far. It's specific to KELP, but I think it's a great question. So maybe we could address it before we move into the accessibility portion of our presentation. And perhaps Katie is the most appropriate person to answer this question, but our administrator asked if a district needs to have a person trained on the KELP assessment, even if they don't have a student identified in their district as KELP eligible.
So technically, if you have no one that's eligible at this point, no, but I say that big but, we know students move in and out of our districts all the time. So it would be in best interest to have one person trained. The training for KELP administration really is between 60 and 90 minutes to complete, depending on how quickly you read through the materials that they have presented and the few videos and take the quiz. So although you may not have anybody, you never know if someone's going to move into your district, and it's better to be prepared in the event that they move in real close to that testing close of the window. And so you have someone who's prepared, ready to go in the event that that occurs.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie.
You're welcome. All right, so with that, I'm going to start moving us into accessibility and special populations portion of today's training. So when we're taking a look at accessibility, we need to determine as educator teams what those accessibility supports are and how those accessibility supports are determined and designated for our students. So when we take a look at this 3-tier accessibility framework, you can see that the it's like little, like it's bridges. So we're always bridging for access for our students. And the largest bridge that you see is Tier 1. And in looking at Tier 1, this is for our students where it is universal tools that are available to all students. There's tools that every student can have access to if they benefit the student, and it is a support rather than a barrier. This can be scratch paper or a highlighter, and these tools can be used by any student that needs them at any time, regardless of the activity or the content area. Now, the next bridge, which is smaller, is for a smaller group of students. This is when there's designated supports to reduce barriers. These are determined by educator teams that have reviewed that student's strengths and their access needs to determine if a support is needed. And an example of a Tier 2 support or designated support may be to support and promote language access. For example, this could be a bilingual word-to-word glossary on the science test that may be beneficial to a student who is developing language acquisition. Now, the smaller bridge for access or on that continuum of supports are accommodations. Accommodations are for students who have an IEP or Section 504 plan, and the PPT or 504 team has determined that there is a specific need for that individual for access based on the nature of their disability and access needs. So this is just a resource that you guys can use to help frame that. Then when you're asking, okay, well, how do we determine these supports for our students? So as educator teams are reviewing the students' areas of strength, because we always want to leverage their strengths to support any access needs or learning barriers, we want to identify those. We want to identify those potential barriers. We want to look at what's that specific point of access that is needed for that individual for the specific academic task or task that is required for performance tasks. So we always look at the supplementary aids and services needed throughout their daily educational learning environment, because supports should be utilized within the educational learning environment with automaticity, accuracy, fluency, and independence, and not be an unintentional barrier for that individual student. If they're using them in their academic learning environment, on that daily basis, and the students really feel benefit of that support and utilize that support, then that's when we're taking a look at, okay, well, is that support something that they could potentially need and use on a summative test? When we get into accommodations, that's going to be determined by your PPT in Section 504 team. So teams should always review multiple areas of data and source. So that could be an IEP plan, a 504 plan, an ELML support plan, their current performance within the classroom, report cards, SRBI plan. So there's a wealth of knowledge that educators have to help support this determination and decision making. So to help them support this is just another tool to provide a visual and the steps that teams should go through when looking at, is a support the right fit for the job or for the student. So the first thing is expect that all students can and will achieve grade level standards. So one of the biggest things that I always go back to is the work done by John Hattie with looking at teacher efficacy and believing that all students can expect and has that highest effect size. So then it's then educators saying, okay, I know my student can achieve, this is where their strengths are, this is where their learning barriers are. Now I need to learn about those accessibility supports that can be used during instruction and assessment to support my students' access. As they're learning about these accessibility supports, it's really important as teams are learning about that teachers know what that accessibility support is, how it functions, and then what are the steps and tools that the student needs to utilize in order to even access that tool, either instruction or on their summative assessments. Once that is then done, they can select that support for the student to trial and utilize in instruction on assessments. And when I say we're trialing that, that gets then into administration or administer that support and you can do it during your instruction. And then on the summative, you can do it on practice tests to trial, to sit there and see, is that the right fit for the student? And then asking that student's feedback, because then you're going to evaluate, is the right fit? Does the student utilize it with automaticity and fluency? Can they utilize it independently? Does it enhance their ability for access, or does it detract their ability for access? And how does a student feel about it? I think it's a big thing that we have to ask our students is, did you find this beneficial and do you like this tool? And then when we're talking about considerations for our teams, and this is including Section 504 teams and IEP teams or PPT teams, we always want to lead with this with some of the following questions that we have listed here. So how can we leverage student strengths to increase access? What is that continuum of support, going from the lowest level of continuum support to the highest level of continuum support to increase that access? What are the students' barriers that may impact access, or what are the barriers that may even impact their ability to use specific tools? What are the tools and how do we use them? What does it look like? And then just looking at those aspects of reaching out to the student, seeing how that student responds and their feedback. So we do have here the CCSSO questions to ask when selecting accessibility support. These are various tools that can help drive those discussions within your LEA settings and also with parents and with students. So just some reminders. Accessibility supports is not a one-size-fits-all situation. We as individuals do not have a straight learning profile. We all have jagged learning profiles, and so do our students. So what works for one may not work for another student. So it's really important to be intentional in how we plan our accessibility supports for each individual child. and I'm going to say this again, understand the functionality of those supports, because even if the functionality of a support that's used during general instruction, for example, if a student is using accessibility features in Google, or if they're using the Google extension of Google Read and Write, how those accessibility features work as they're doing in instruction may differ than how that accessibility feature works on the summative assessments. So ensuring that students have ample time to practice and generalize how those features work between the different platforms is key. More is not more. For our students. So it's really choosing that right tool and knowing that the students know how to choose the right tool for the job as well. And then ensuring that we're not selecting, as we're determining which supports a student needs, we're not selecting supports that are in conflict or with each other. So for example, having embedded text to speech and the non-embedded read aloud are two conflicting accommodations. One is presented through the platform, one is presented by a human reader. And same thing with speech to text, the embedded speech to text versus a scribe, and then color contrast, the embedded color contrast, and then non-embedded color contrast or color overlay. And then we also then have one of the last ones that we see sometimes, some of the confusion for teams is print size and large print. So just having teams understand which each one of these tools is, and the right job for the tool for the right job of the job. So what we have here for you is a guide to help your teams at the LEAs develop a process. And we go through from an overarching district level process to a school level process to an educator team process to help support the determination of the most appropriate accessibility supports, going from the continuum of universal tool to designated support to accommodation to special documented accommodation to help provide access for students. So this is just a great tool. If you haven't seen it yet, please share it with your teams. There's not only how to set this up in your district, but guiding questions in this, as well as different tools and resources to guide these discussions, as well as to get information on, is this tool the right fit for the student, and also a student feedback tool. So now I'm going to turn it over to Deirdre, and she's going to walk through which types of accessibility supports are available on our summative Smarter Balance and NGSS assessments.
Thanks, Katie. And I just want to give you a shout out. That was a really great introduction to accessibility supports. And we hope that you, as our colleagues in the schools, that you appreciate this foundation that we've laid out, because really the work that we're doing is not only on behalf of student access, but it's really ensuring that they have access to instruction. The assessment is just one small piece of this, of our advocacy for students in access and equity. So thank you for that, Katie. And I'm including in the chat a link to a solely dedicated webpage for our planning and placement teams and Section 504 teams. And what this page includes is some of the key resources that they should be referencing when making determinations regarding student access on statewide assessments. But then we've also taken some of our key resources and created abridged versions of information so that it's more bite-sized and accessible to them. We know that teams don't have hours to spend reviewing some of our documents. So this website, please share it with your educators in district and let them know that, we appreciate their work and also understand how important it is for them to have that foundation as far as how accommodations work in the context of statewide assessments. So based on everything that Katie's already shared, I'm just going to take a couple of moments to orient you to our online computer adaptive assessments for Smarter Balanced and Science. And as Katie already indicated, we have a continuum of accessibility supports that are available to our students online. We have embedded universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations, and those are maintained within the online test delivery system. We also have a classification of non-embedded tools, and then those are things that the teacher will provide the student in the test setting if it is needed. An example of a non-embedded tool might include scratch paper or a handheld calculator on the NGSS assessment for kiddos who might not feel confident using the embedded Desmos calculator. There are 3 key resources that we've indicated on this slide. One is it's called the Description of Designated Supports and Accommodations. This tool was developed for our Planning and Placement team, Section 504 teams, and it includes a very brief description of all of the accessibility features. So it's like a table format, and it's really a great reference tool for learning the abridged version of these supports. As you see on your slide, we have a picture of the Smarter Balance and Science accessibility chart. This really is a high-level overview of the continuum of supports. We have a number of EL/ML language supports that fall within the designated support category, so that's in the orange section of this table. You'll find that the accommodations are categorized in the red section. We include hyperlinks and access to supplemental resources that might be associated with some of these supports and accommodations. So please share this resource with your teams. It's just one document that gives access to information on accommodations, but the key Bible, if you will, the major document that you can find anything related to accessibility on statewide assessments, including the Connecticut SAT School Day, can be found in the CSDE assessment guidelines. And the guidelines are really, it's a living document. We may make changes over the course of the year, but please access this if you're looking for information on maybe how an accommodation functions, or what is print size versus a large print test booklet, if there are ever any questions about how accommodations function in relation to testing. The guidelines are your key resource. And just know that we update all of these resources over the course of the summer, but sometimes it's an iterative process. So you might find that in September, you go to access the guidelines and maybe the previous school year is dated. Still use that resource, because typically there aren't really any changes to accommodations, except for sometimes I have an opportunity to provide additional clarification. So if you're ever wondering the status of a resource, just let us know. So we're just going to take a moment to breeze through the different types of the different levels of accessibility features. Katie mentioned that universal tools are available to all students. So these are things that are embedded within the system. They can be used to help, like as test taking strategies, like we have a strike through for our item responses. Kids can highlight, they can expand their test screen. So from having like a split screen, they can, have a more linear presentation of that. Kids can zoom in, zoom out, they can take notes using the embedded note feature. But share with your teachers the resource that we have that we're referencing on this slide. It's called the 5 built-in test tools every student should know. This is a really great tool to orient kids and their teachers as far as modeling these universal tools on a practice test, so that kids know what's available. They can use some of these tools to their advantage, and then there's like no stress on test day. The next level is our designated supports. Again, this is a category for a higher level need, but these are accessibility tools that are available for all kids as long as there is an identified need by an educator team. So this isn't, something that a single person should be identifying on behalf of a student, but really it should be a more, team-based decision involving those individuals that know and work most closely with the student and elicit student feedback. So designated supports might include something like text to speech of the math or science assessment. We have a number of language supports that are available for our students. So for instance, if you have a fluent Spanish speaker who is not fluent or proficient in English, we have an option where the student can have the math or science assessment presented to them in Spanish. And I'm not going to take away from Katie's presentation because she does have a couple of slides coming up that focus on the ELML supports, but we did just want to give you some examples of how those designated supports work in conjunction with the assessment. And then the final level, well, the second to final level is our accommodations. And these are certainly more customized supports for students who have disabilities related to executive functioning, visual hearing impairments, print disabilities, physical disabilities. So we want to ensure that kids have access to these assessments based on what their identified need is. So there are a variety of ways that kids can access the assessment through assistive technology, American Sign Language, embedded refreshable braille. We offer closed captioning. And if there's an accommodation that your kiddo needs that you're not finding on our, within our documents, then there's a process for you. And Katie's going to share that coming up. Before we move on to the next slide, I just want to reiterate that accommodations are determined by planning and placement teams or Section 504 teams. Accommodations must be selected for the student's current grade, as well as any other grade that's covered by the duration of their plan. Those accommodations are planned specifically in CT SEDS. There's a statewide assessment tile, and for each of the assessments that correspond with the student's grade of enrollment, the team will select those accommodations. So again, this isn't a candy shop. The team should not be choosing accommodations lightly. They really need to reference our description of designated supports and accommodations or the CSDE assessment guidelines to really understand the purpose of the accommodations, eligibility, and how they function in conjunction with online testing. We have a process for how to document accessibility features in TIDE for kiddos that don't have a documented plan. So these are kids that are within the general population. They don't have an IEP or Section 504 plan. And I know there was a question in the chat earlier about this. And so this process has not changed. We've always had our district administrators either manually enter designated supports in TIDE, or for larger districts, it might be more convenient to download a CSV or Excel file. We have a template in TIDE that you can download, and then essentially you would populate the accessibility supports for your students and then upload that to TIDE. The key here is that you want to make sure that students have their accessibility supports documented in TIDE before they take an interim assessment, a practice test, or the summative assessment. And we have this resource called Documenting Designated Supports and Accommodations in TIDE. How original is that? We have this resource that you can follow to learn about that process. And this is, again, specific for kids who don't have plans. And one other plug, if you're going to upload a student file to TIDE, make sure that you remove any kiddos or any records of students who have plans in CT SED. We don't want to overwrite anything that might be syncing to TIDE. And then alternatively, for your kids that do have IEPs or Section 504 plans, as long as they're documented in CT SEDS, as long as the plan is implemented and finalized, those supports will sync to TIDE. But please reference these resources that we have here. We have a CT SEDS TIDE FAQ. There's a cross-checking student test TIDE test settings resource and again, the documenting designated supports in TIDE. Those resources will give you information about that syncing process and what to do and what to check for if you're not finding accommodations in TIDE. And if you realize that a kiddo does not have accommodations set in TIDE, and they should, check for their IDEA or Section 504 indicator. These aren't things that you can physically turn on in TIDE. If you're familiar with the TIDE system, all the student demographic data comes directly from PSIS, so it's really only for viewing purposes. But if you notice that something's incorrect, I mean, it could be the spelling of a student's name or their grade or IDEA or 504 indicator is not turned on, or if you have an ELML that should be identified as ELML, reach out to your PSIS coordinator and have them update that information. And it takes about 24 hours for the data to sync to TIDE. And then the final plug is if you have a student that has a documented plan, please do not have your administrators update their test settings in TIDE. That really needs to come directly from CT Sets. If you find something that's incorrect, a missing accommodation or one of those accommodations Katie talked about, the kid has large print, but then they also have print size or something that like indicates that they're taking an online test, reach out to the student's case manager. And if there are errors, that those can be corrected through the amendment process. So please, no changes to students' TIDE settings for kiddos with documented plans. Now, Katie is going to walk you through some supports for our ELMLs.
Thanks, Deirdre. All right, so for students who are progressing towards their English language proficiency, including English learners or multilingual learners, ELMLs, and duly identified ELMLs with disabilities, they may benefit from designated supports that promote language access during Connecticut's statewide Summit of Assessments. So once again, these supports are not a one-size-fits-all, and it really should be designated to meet that student's individual and unique learning style, profile, and need. When we're taking a look at this, some of the supports that may be available, and once again, these supports should be used during instruction with the student. The student should have automaticity with these tools and access supports. But some of the tools that you may provide for students who are ELMLs or duly identified ELMLs are simplified test directions, on-the-fly translations, printed test directions, and other tools that a student may benefit from if they're a Spanish speaker and they are literate in Spanish, may be a Spanish presentation. So it's important to remind teams and students that this is tools that they can use for access. And it's also important to share with educators who are making these determinations for our students who are identified as ELMLs, the embedded and non-embedded designated supports for our English language learners and multilingual learners. What this tool is going to do is it's going to provide teams with the accessibility supports that are available on Smarter Balance and NGSS that support our students who are developing their English language acquisition with that. So, in taking a look at one of those tools, I kind of hit upon it a little bit beforehand, is the embedded Spanish presentation for math and science. So this is a tool that for students who are literate Spanish speakers, they can toggle between a full Spanish translation of the math and science stimuli and items to an English test presentation. So all the navigation tools and buttons and test content are presented to that student in Spanish. So this is why we say the student has to be literate in Spanish and be able to read Spanish in order to have this as an accessibility tool. So this is one thing just to be aware of and to also practice if a student has this so they understand how to toggle back and forth if needed. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Deirdre, and she's going to go through with you some of our reader supports for students.
Thanks, Katie. Actually, before I cover the reader supports, I'm just going to answer a question that is in the chat. and it pertains to the Spanish presentation, Katie. So the
Okay.
question is, can students have the Spanish text read aloud in Spanish during the Spanish presentation? And I'll answer quickly and Katie can fill in. The answer is yes, we do allow a Spanish read aloud. We have specific guidelines for how to provide that Spanish read aloud. But the student's going to need Spanish presentation on their test screen because the teacher is going to be reading verbatim from the student's test screen. So, is there anything else you want to add about that, Katie? Just as far as how the Spanish read aloud works?
Yeah, so with the Spanish read aloud, and thank you, Deirdre, is that once again, that teacher is also going to need to be trained on the read aloud aspect. So they would need to read and be familiar with the read aloud for Spanish guidelines that we have, review that, practice how to administer that on a practice test, and then also complete the security and confidentiality agreement for being a read aloud. So that's one of the big things is to remember if that is a support a student needs.
Thank you. And I am including a link in the chat that will give you access to those Spanish reader guidelines. And that question does connect really well into this next topic about reader support. So when we look at the continuum of accessibility features for Smarter Balanced and GSS, there are ways that we can support our students. There are ways that we can support their language and communication needs. There are ways that we can give access to print to support our students with print disabilities or visual disabilities, et cetera. And so again, you want to reference the accessibility chart and the assessment guidelines to see what is available based on what the student's documented need is. Katie, if you can just move to the next slide. Thank you. There are some considerations though when we think about reader supports, especially reader accommodations on the Smarter Balanced ELA reading assessment. We really encourage teams to establish the questions that you see on this slide. So some of the key takeaways are to determine if the student has a documented print or visual disability. And a documented print disability might include kids that have, dyslexia or significant encoding, decoding, comprehension issues. In the case of visual impairments, we know that some students might be trialing Braille, but they haven't developed a proficiency with that code. So that certainly providing a student with a refreshable Braille or a Braille booklet, that might be certainly an inappropriate accommodation for a kiddo. So we would want the team to determine how to best provide student with access if they have not developed proficiency skills in Braille. When we look at kiddos that have struggling readers, for instance, we can offer designated supports to those students. We can provide text-to-speech if kids are using text-to-speech in the classroom and feel comfortable using text-to-speech of the math and science assessment and of the ELA reading, English language arts items, that might be appropriate for struggling readers. But for kiddos that have higher level need, we want to establish that there's evidence of a persistence of the student's disability despite intensive targeted instruction in the science of reading. So how to determine that? We have some resources that will help teams orient themselves with the the range of accessibility supports, and then the screeners that should be used to confirm eligibility for some of the higher level accommodations. So I'm going to point out 2 resources that are available, and essentially the resources provide the same kind of information, but they're presented differently. So in the resource you're looking at now, this is a reader designated support and accommodation document that outlines the different level of reader accessibility supports for math, for science, for ELA, and it includes embedded resources associated with some of those accommodations. Like, so again, for your ELML that might benefit from a Spanish read aloud, in this document, you'll find that there are some supplemental resources that should be used by the teacher if serving as a Spanish reader. And there are some protocols as well that teachers will need to complete if that is associated with the accommodation. The next resource that we have is a table format of that information. And again, our titles on these documents are not very original, but this is the reader options table. And again, it provides the range of accessibility supports by content area. So please share these resources with your teams. They really should have an understanding of the range of ways that they can support their students, whether it's lower level support with the designated support or an accommodation. And we're going to move into how kids can be supported for those that have really more significant visual and print disabilities. So we do offer text-to-speech of the ELA reading assessment, but this is for students who have documented print disabilities or visual impairments that are unable to use, or maybe they are using some of the embedded accommodations to help provide access, but they really need that reader of the reading passage and items and whatnot. So the screener that teams should use will help establish the preponderance of evidence that the student not only has a print or visual disability, but that this disability is something that affects the student's decoding, fluency, comprehension skills, that the student is using this accommodation throughout instruction, even in their leisure, that this is something that they more than likely are using outside of school as well, and that the student's disability impacts the student's overall ability to access instruction across all curriculum areas. So this is if it turns out that the student doesn't have enough evidence of needing this accommodation, then certainly we would recommend that you provide students with test taking strategies, maybe ways that they can use their scrap paper or their electronic notes to help annotate, highlight, so to really incorporate some of those other reading strategies to help parse out the reading assessment or other parts of the Smarter Balance assessment system. We have a sister guide to the decision guidelines, and this is for kids who require a read aloud. So in the instance that students are unable to access the text to speech and they have an established print or visual disability, a human reader might be more appropriate. And we give the example of students who rely on lip reading or visual support. These the read aloud accommodation is probably one of the highest level accommodations provided for the reading assessment. And for a student who needs this accommodation, they will more than likely have a read aloud for all assessments, so for the math assessment and science, et cetera. So teams should be referencing the documented evidence for read aloud of the Smarter Balanced assessment screener to, again, establish the preponderance of evidence that the student uses a human reader in a read aloud in multiple facets of their school day, and that's the only way they can access print and information. We have read aloud guidelines. So for the teachers that are serving as a human reader, whether it's as a designated support. So if you have students that are having the math or science assessment read to them, or the ELA items, the read aloud guidelines provides the teacher with explicit information about how the content is read to them based on the subject area. And we also, this document includes specific information for those teachers who are providing a read aloud of the reading passages. We have embedded protocols and security forms that the teacher should complete. The district administrator should also sign, and then the documentation should be maintained locally. Katie's now going to walk you through the special documented accommodations.
All right. So in exceptional circumstances, there may be students whose disabilities are such that allowable embedded and non-embedded accommodations, as described previously and also in our CST assessment guidelines, provide insufficient access to the Smarter Balanced or NGSS assessments. So when we're thinking about that continuum of supports, this is at that highest level of support on that continuum for our students. These are non-standard accommodations, and once again, they align to what the student is using during their daily instruction. Is that continuity between instruction and summative assessments. These supports must be administered in a individual setting for that child, or in that student who is taking our assessments. And some of these supports include scribe, read aloud of ELA passages like Deirdre just described, is that higher level of continuum of support for our reading supports, a human signer, as well as math manipulatives, or a non-embedded calculator. Please note there are some grade requirements for some of these supports, as well as print on demand. And Deirdre did talk about earlier when she was talking about accommodations, if there is an accommodation that you don't see that the student may require in order for access. Those are called customized accommodations, and that's when you're going to be reaching out to Deirdre and I now as soon as possible to see if that support that student needs may be an allowable support that we can work with you and your team to have that student have. But that has to be an approval through the CSTE. So if you're wondering what these supports really are, to get into a little bit deeper and just as a standalone tool, all this information obvious is within our CSD guidelines, but we also made another standalone tool for teams to use if they're really wanting to just focus on special documented accommodations. We have this tool for our DAs and teams to review what these supports are, where these supports will be in, either is it ELA, math, science, or only math, or only science, or so it really tells how that is and what the functionality of that support is, as well as if there is any additional documentation and guidance around that support that teams need to be aware of or complete. It's really important that teams, if there is those guidelines, that teams review that ahead of time, that they know how to administer these special documented accommodations and sign any security and confidentiality agreements. So now I'm going to pass it back over to Deirdre, and she's going to go through large print and braille test booklets and how DAs can order that in Tide.
Thanks, Katie. This process has not changed, but if we do have new district administrators, I just want to take a minute to let you know about one of the responsibilities that you have as a district administrator, and that is to order large print and braille test booklets in Tide if you have students that are determined to take these assessments via paper pencil versus the online system. So administrators can order large print and braille test kits for Smarter Balance and Science in Tide after January 26th. And one of the ways that you can determine eligibility is in Tide if you have students that have large print identified or braille. And there are a variety of braille code options available for students. So make sure that teams have correctly identified the braille code in CT sets. And again, if there are any questions about that, please reach out to your student's case manager. I also just want to make a plug that sometimes our teams are confused by large print versus print size, and print size is an embedded designated support. There are a variety of levels available to students that give them greater access to font size and text on the page that goes above and beyond the functionality of Zoom. So if you know that a student can use the computer and take an online assessment and they have large print set and Tide, take a moment to reach out to the case manager before you go ahead and order those large print booklets. And when the large print is designated in Tide, that will deactivate the student's access to an online assessment. So we do get a lot of questions over the course of the testing window as to why kids can't access a Smarter Balance test, and this might be the reason why. So just wanted to point that out to you. Now, how do you order these materials? It's very straightforward. In Tide, under Preparing for Testing, you scroll down the menu, there is an option for ordering. And essentially, as a district administrator, you'll verify your contact information, your shipping information, you'll enter the student's SACID and specify the type of booklet that the student needs, and you can go ahead and submit your order. And then what will happen is you can track the shipment in Tide, and usually the material will be in district within about a week's time. If you have any questions about the ordering status above and beyond what you see in Tide, you can just give our office a call. And we don't have a slide for this, but I want to reiterate that there is one incredibly important step to when you're administering assessments to students using large print or Braille. And that means that after the student has taken their test, a teacher, a trained teacher, whoever is responsible for working with that student should record the student responses into the data entry interface. That has to happen by May 29th. That's the last day of testing. So all student responses from Braille and large print need to be transcribed into the data entry interface in order for that student to be counted as a tester, in order for the student to get a score, and for their results to be included in the reporting process. And that information is included in the shipment of materials as well as in our test administration manuals. So just make sure that in those cases, you don't overlook that important detail.
Thanks, Deirdre. I just want to add one more thing about the paper orders. So as you're going through in your InTide and you're looking at the student's dashboard, if you see text-to-speech also listed for that student for any of our assessments, or any other embedded tool, that may be where you want to reach out to the team to sit there and see, did you mean the paper or did you mean the embedded tool? Because you have other embedded supports listed. So that can just be like a, let me go back and check before you submit the paper order. So now we're going to go over to practice tests. So practice, practice, practice. I can't stress how important practice tests are for students as well as for your staff. So getting into those practice tests is really going to build that familiarity with the platforms that students will be encountering during the summative assessments. They can become familiar with the universal tools that are available for them, the toolbars, how to navigate all the different things that are on the assessment. And it's also important for teachers to show and demonstrate, this is how you use this tool. This is when you're in the test that, this is how you're going to access this. This is how you're going to go on into the next question. It's really important that teachers and students have that familiarity prior to test, so it's just fluid and seamless the day of testing on the summative assessment. It's also important for practice tests if students have accessibility supports. Let them become familiar with how those accessibility supports are on the Smarter Balanced and NGSS platform. That way they can go in, they can see it, they have the comfortability, they're building the automaticity and fluency and independence with those tools. So once again, day of testing, it's second nature. These students can go in and utilize them. Also, if you have new teachers, to use the practice tests to become familiar with the platforms as well. That's really, really key, really important for everybody. So,
Katie, can I just jump in real quick?
Absolutely.
Just a reminder, The practice tests are public, so you can even share them with parents. So let's
Absolutely.
say you're working with families and for your third graders who've never taken a standardized well, I can't say they haven't taken a standardized assessment, but like a smarter balanced assessment, like that, this might be something that you can share with families if they're reluctant or they're not so sure like what these tests are about. So practice tests are available for everything, for NGSS and Smarter Balance, for our alternate assessments, and even KELP. So just, know that they are available and serve a variety of purposes.
Thanks, Deirdre. All right, so important dates. If you haven't marked your calendars already, please do so now. Just some information for when you're planning the assessments that are, well, KELP has already started, so we're going with that. But for CTA, CTOS, and our Smarter Balance and NGS assessments, please be aware of some of these important dates that are coming up for you. When we're talking about the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form, we do say that students should have that form within their implemented and finalized IEP as a recommended date of February 2nd. This is to ensure correct rostering of students, so students are not accidentally given the Smarter Balance assessment when they're either CTA or CTOS eligible, or vice versa. It's really important to ensure that if there are PPTs, which we know happen throughout the school year, that you're in constant communication and collaboration with your special education teams to know when those meetings may be occurring, and if testing needs to be held until those plans have made those determinations for the students prior to the testing window. So the other thing we have is medical exemptions. So for Smarter Balance, NGSS, and CTA and CTOS, the deadline for medical exemptions is June 5th. The CSD assessment guidelines does have an entire section on medical exemptions, emergency medical exemptions. If you are ever questioning if a student is eligible for an emergency medical exemption, please reach out to us. We are here to help support you and the students. And then also for those customized accommodations, like I said, those specialized special accommodations, you need to reach out to Deirdre and I as soon as possible, or well in advance of testing, for approvals. And then we're taking a look at the early stopping rule for our assessments. Teams, if they're feeling that the student may qualify for an early stopping rule, and we're going to get into that in just a few more slides, so I'm not going to go into depth in that right now. But if the TEAs are feeling the student may meet that eligibility, they should be completing the student response check and student response check behavioral notes through February 2nd, and then submitting that to their DA and TIDE to submit no later than March 2nd for early stopping rule for CTA and CTOS. So now we're going to pause here. I think I see some questions in the chat.
So Katie, there's a question from Keely. Hi, Keely. Keely asks, what if a district has a new student needing KELP and the PPT is next week? And Keely, we know this happens because we get these questions all the time. So Keely wonders, like, what happens if the kiddo also might qualify for an ESR?
So great question, Keely. So we understand, like I said, PPTs happen throughout the school year. The big thing is for the PPT is to know that the KELP window closes on March 6th. So that is a hard close for both of our ELP assessments. So the PPT is going to want to ensure that the IEP is both finalized and implemented with ample time for testing, because and that the alternate assessment, if the PPT determines the student is eligible, so that is through the completion of the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form, which is embedded in CT SEDS and the district and state testing tile, that is done at that PPT for that determination. If that student meets all eligibility criteria, that IEP has to have that, and then it has to be finalized and implemented in CT SEDS. Once that occurs, it can take up to 24 to 48 hours for that then to sink into Tide. So it's really, really important that teams know those specific timelines, as well as the timelines for the close the test window. Big things that teams need to be aware of is that as soon as that implements, to do the ESR, and we're going to get into this in a little bit, is 3 separate days, 3 separate times a day. So the student has to be determined eligible, finalized, and implemented. Then 3 additional days on top of that if the student is potentially being considered for an ESR. And then if the student doesn't meet that ESR, they may qualify then for a domain exemption. And that domain exemption window is a close of February 27th. So there's a lot of moving parts when we're now into that testing window for our students who are newly being identified as alt eligible and duly identified alt eligible. So, but Keely, feel free to please reach out. We can always set up a Teams to work with your specific situation, but that is something that it's not too late yet, is the big key thing. There is time, but it's just being aware of those deadlines.
Great, thanks, Katie. And Julie has a question. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Julie.
Julie has a question about kiddos in grade 11, and if they've always qualified for alternates, do they have to test? And so I'm just going to answer kind of globally for everyone on this call to know that if you have a student registered in grade 11 in PSIS, then those kiddos are supposed to participate in state testing. So whether that's the standard assessment, the standard Connecticut SAT school day and the NGSS, or for our kiddos that qualify for alternates, if they're in grade 11, they qualify for math, the alternate math, ELA, and CTAS. And Julie, Julie, do you want to come off mute and ask another question? I'm just reading the chat. Okay. So I think, Julie, you can just unmute. Or Abe can unmute you. I'm not even going to mess around with the technology on this presentation.
There we go.
Hi.
There we go. Hi. Yeah, I was confused when I saw that last slide and it said something about newly identified 11th graders. So I was like, wait a minute, did I miss something? I thought, okay, but no, you're saying so they still will take the alternate assessment.
Yes. So what happens with a newly identified 11th graders is that could have multiple meanings. Sometimes for our 11th graders, they might start off in the school year with 10th grade, like credit for 10th grade status, and then like move up to grade 11, or even skip a grade. And then they go from 10 to 12. And like during the window, because they're not identified as grade 11 in PSIS, those kiddos wouldn't test. But there could be a situation, Julie, where maybe you have a kiddo that just moves into your program or moves into Connecticut. And therefore, a determination may need to be made as far as alt eligibility. And that happens after that December 22nd date. And the reason why we have that is because we're gearing up for like SAT. We provide the College Board with student data, eligibility data for grade 11. We also provide DRC with students that are eligible to take the standard assessment. So if we know that kids qualify for alternate assessments in advance, then those kiddos are removed from the roster. So that's a really long answer to your question, but the takeaway is that if you have an 11th grader that's in PSIS, then that kiddo is considered a participant for testing.
Right, that makes more sense. I was like, that can't be, yeah, okay. All right, thank you for clarifying.
Of course.
All right.
Are there any other questions? Okay. I think we're going to move on then. So because you're district administrators and you do all things related to testing, and we know that you do them well, we appreciate your time and energy and expertise. We do want to close this presentation by reviewing the alternate assessment system. Because more than likely you do have kids that qualify for alternate assessments, or if you don't, maybe you did, or maybe you will in the future. So, you know, our alternate assessments are designed similar to our standard assessments. They're online, they are based on grade level expectations that are scaffolded. We have content core connectors that are used specifically for this population to help give kids access, kids with the most significant cognitive disabilities. So the screening process is, it's made through the planning and placement team, and they use the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form as the screener for determining eligibility. So students that participate in alternate assessments, these are kiddos that have a disability category under IDEA. More than likely, these are kids with either an intellectual disability, autism, traumatic brain injury, multiple disabilities, so more complex need. And there's evidence that the student has an intellectual impairment, that the student has functional adaptive skills that are well below age level expectations. And these students have intensive instruction and significant supports throughout their daily instruction. And these are kids that are really working on developing life skills and having their daily needs met through a variety of supports and accessibility features. So again, the determination is made through the planning and placement team using this eligibility form. We also have a resource reference on this slide for the annotated alternate form. And what that does is that's just an added resource for our teams to understand what exactly we're looking for when it comes to documenting the cognitive assessments or the other types of evidence throughout the student's plan that might support an intellectual impairment. So please share that resource with teams just to provide some further clarification on eligibility. And then, as I mentioned, and Katie has mentioned, the determination is made within CT SED. So as displayed on the slide there to the left under the statewide assessment page in CT SEDS, there's a question that teams respond to. Is a student being considered for participation on the Connecticut alternate assessment? And if the answer is yes, then the eligibility form will auto-populate. And it's critical that teams take the necessary time to complete each of the data points. We should not see qualifying features of NA or TBA when it comes to cognitive assessments. We want to see actual scores, and the same applies for the functional behavioral assessments. We need data points that support that the students, for eligibility, we're looking at scores that are 1.5 standard deviations below mean score. So we're really looking for the team's fidelity and accuracy in documenting this information. And there are other examples of psychological reports, evaluations, things that the team, data that the team has that can be used to determine eligibility. So we certainly want to reiterate the importance of ensuring that there is sufficient and accurate information used to make these determinations. We have a crosswalk here for the 3 different types of alternate assessments we have available. We have our academic assessments, math, ELA, and science. We also are in year 3 of our alternate English language proficiency assessment, which is amazing that we can even offer this assessment. It really levels the playing field. It's an equity issue. We can have students that take the alternate ELP, exit EL, ML status if they make proficiency on the CALP assessment. So this is it is an important assessment for our students. So this particular slide provides a crosswalk of training expectations, deadlines, security, things like that. And then the final thing that I'm going to point out to you before Katie walks you through some other key takeaways is that if you have a student that takes the alternate assessment in grades 3 and 4, their trained TEA will need to designate if the student needs a nonverbal form in TIDE. So these are for students who are unable to respond with oral speech. Maybe they're deaf blind, or they're using or trialing augmentative or alternative communication. So it's important that the students have the most appropriate ELA for alternate assessment form or test, if you will, and that is selected in TIDE by the teacher prior to administering the alternate. And there's more information about this in the test administration manual.
Great, thanks, Deirdre. So now we're going to talk about ESR. So Abe had at the beginning of the presentation that there was some new with the ESR. So what is new this year for the ESR submission is that in the submission, DAs will be submitting the student response check behavioral notes in addition to the attestation form. So that's the new bit for the ESR this year. The processes for the student response check and eligibility for ESR has not changed. It's just that now this year we are requiring that the student response check behavioral notes be also included in the upload along with the attestation form being completed. So you might be going, well, Katie, what is the ESR? Well, the ESR is is for students who are not able to participate on our alternate assessments due to their unique nature of their disability, and this is a very small percentage of students with the most significant cognitive and functional adaptive behaviors, demonstrate no observable way to communicate a response, and this is during instruction, and this is on summative assessments. So these students currently do not have communicative intent. They have not developed yet a means of communication. So these are students who are not yet at a total communication aspect. They're not yet at point or gesture or able to use a switch or assistive tech from low tech all the way up to high tech. These are students who have no means of observable or communicative intent. So because of this, the CSD developed a method for identifying and determining these students. So a trained TEA who is familiar with the student and their specific unique learning needs will complete the student's response check and complete the SRC behavioral notes. We did update and provide additional clarity on the administration of the SRC because as we were seeing the SRC behavioral notes, we updated the ESR and student response check guidance document. So if you click on this link, you'll see that this was updated December 19th to provide additional clarity to TEAs who are administering the student response check. So the student response check, and we wanted to also include this for you. So you were aware, so as you're seeing this being submitted to you, you know what you should be looking for in that submission for the state. So a student response check is a series of trials that occurs over 3 days at 3 separate times of day because we always want to sit there and try to find our students at their best. Some of us are morning people, some of us are midday people, some of us are later in the day people. So we're always trying to find when that student is going to have the best opportunity to demonstrate communicative intent. So that's why we say 3 separate days, 3 separate times a day. So on each day of the SRC, 3 trials will be completed. So that will be a total of, when you're looking at those SRC behavioral notes, a total of 9 trials for that individual student for the 3 days. So on SRC 1, what happens is the TEA is going to administer the 3 trials to the student. If the TEA does not see an observable means of communicative intent, so this is communicative intent, this is not that it has to be correct. It's just that they were able to communicate an intent towards a response. If they do not see communicative intent on all 3 trials, then they proceed to day 2. If there was communicative intent on any of the 3 trials, even if incorrect, then the process stops. The student does not qualify for the ESR. If there wasn't communicative intent, like I said, you're going to go on to day 2. You're going to follow the same procedure for day 2. No communicative intent, move to day 3. If communicative intent, you stop. If you get all the way through day 3 and there has been no communicative intent for all 9 trials, then the TEA submits the SRC behavioral notes along with the completed attestation form to the DA for signatures for from the the TEA, special ed director, and the district administrator in Tide. Then you get to submit it. So here's some simple tips and tricks to ensure accurate submission for the ESR submission. First thing, make sure that you have the student's correct SACID. Then check in Tide. Is that SACID showing that the alternate assessment indicator is set to yes? If those 2 things are set, then I would proceed to go fill out that form and upload the SRC behavioral notes and attestation. As you're looking at those, the other things is when you're looking at those attestations and the SRC behavioral notes, make sure that everything is dated, you have the SACID listed, you have the TEA's EIN number listed, all signatures are there on the SRC notes that you can clearly see that there has been no communicative intent, that there's been the trials completed, and then make sure that you are submitting both the SRC behavioral notes and the attestation form as an upload into the Tide submission form. So if your ESR has been submitted, you will get an email from donot reply@cambienassessment.com. You will receive that if it's an approval, needs more information, or rejected. If you get an email saying it needs more information or rejected, Deirdre and I will reach out to you for what either we need for information or the rationale for rejection. Once approved, this is in this Tide system by us here at the CSTE. It will upload nightly to turn on the ESR or early stopping rule indicator on that student's dashboard. Once that happens, you do not need to go any further. Please share this information with your TEAs. They do not start a test session. The student is done, their participation expectations have been met, and then we will, our partners at Cambien will close that student's test session out. They will close it out for you. So there's no further action. So as soon as you get the approval, woohoo, you're done. Everyone's done with that. So don't even go any further. Do not pass go, stop, we're good. So training. Every single year for all of our alternate assessments, TEAs must complete the annual training. We have annual training for CTAA and CTAS, which is on this slide, and we have annual training that must be completed for KELP. I'm going to go into that next. So for our teachers who are going to be administering the CTA and CTAS, the district administrator in Tide must ensure that they have the TEA status and that they complete this online training, which is located on the portal. They must complete all 4 modules. They don't have to do it all in one sitting. They can do the modules, module 1 one day, module 2 the next day. But the key is they must complete all 4 modules, take the quiz, and pass the quiz with 80% or better. There are some resources here that we have for you that TEAs will need to review and also DAs will want to review on the alternate assessments. So please share this information with your teams. There's also some additional information and resources here that we have for teams to support them in the alternate assessment administration and also with determining eligibility. Deirdre did talk about that annotated Connecticut Alternate Assessment System eligibility form. That really is going to be a tool to help PPT teams look at that eligibility determination and guide discussions and questions around if the student meets that eligibility when they're in that PPT making that determination and documenting it in CT sets. Yes.
Can you tell our colleagues how, because I forgot to mention this, can you tell them what happens once the team determines eligibility and CT sets, like what
Absolutely.
happens with the TIDE system?
So once the PPT has made the determination through the completion. So remember the slide where Deirdre showed CT says, is a student being considered for the alternate assessment eligibility form? Clicked yes. They complete the alternate assessment eligibility form using current and numerical data from evaluations. Once that is all set, it's been verified, the team has determined that the student is all eligible. Once the IEP is finalized and implemented, what happens is that then syncs over to the TIDE system, and that you, like I said, 24 to 48 hours, and then that turns on the alternate assessment indicator in TIDE. That then opens up the possibility for that, or the ability for that child to then take the alternate assessments, because that's all that's going to populate for that student. When a teacher tries to go in and administer, they're only going to see the alternate assessments for that student, because the alternate assessment indicator has turned on in TIDE because that plan has made that determination. Thank you for reminding that, Deirdre. So KELP. So we are in KELP, but like we said, determinations are still occurring. We understand that. So teachers who are going to be administering KELP also need to be a TEA in TIDE, and they need to complete the annual training for KELP, and that's KELP Alt ELPA through ELPA 21. So we did put the link here for you. You can click on the link. The district verification code. So we get this question a lot. If someone who is newly registering for the ELPA 21 training, everybody's district verification code here in the state is all lowercase ELPA 21. It's not top secret. So please know that. We also have it on the directions for accessing KELP online training for new users. It really walks your new users who haven't registered for the ELPA 21 platform yet. This is how you sign in. This is how you register. Here's your district verification code. Once you've registered and completed all the information, this is how you go and find your training. And here's a screenshot of what that training is for this year, along with the title. So there's no confusion on which specific training module they need to take, because there are multiple training modules, because this is part of the consortium of ELPA 21. It really lists down, this is the Alt ELPA training summative module for the 25-26 administration. After completion, just like the CTA and CTAS, after completion, they have to take a test, pass it, and then they'll receive a certificate. What is different is that certificate is only going to show within the ELPA 21 platform. So districts need to come up with a means of how they are going to house those certificates locally. It does not transition to TIDE. It does not show that the TEA is trained through ELPA 21. That is a maintained locally certificate. So teachers should print it down, have it for themselves, and districts should come up with a policy on how to ensure that their TEAs are trained through ELPA 21. We also did additional office hours on KELP and CSDE specific policies around KELP eligibility, ESR, domain exemptions, and accessibility supports, and how to access the test, and the secure directions for test administration and what that looks like. So you can click on this link here, which will bring you to the KELP office hours. We should be posting the video of that training within the next week. But we do have posted currently the presentation. So we've also have some additional online training for you and your teams to support their understanding of not only of our alternate assessments, but also the different supports that are offered on Smarter Balanced and NGSS, and that can include the embedded and non-embedded language supports for EL and ML students, are also the reader options for our students. So these are just some additional resources that you can share with teams if they want to learn and do a deeper dive into these areas.
And we also have 2 trainings next week. I'm just
Yes.
putting it out there. If
Shameless
your
plug.
colleagues, I know, I'm just maximizing our audience. So if you have colleagues that are interested in learning more about alternate assessments, we're doing a 1-hour webinar on Wednesday. And then on Friday, Katie and I are offering an accessibility training. You know, a lot of what we cover today will be part of that training, but it's an hour presentation on all things accessibility. So check out the student assessment newsletter because there are links to those for the registration in the last student assessment edition. Sorry, Katie.
No, I'm glad. Shameless plug. I'm all about plugging additional PD that we're offering to support you guys. So if you have any questions, here's our contact information. We are here to support you and everything that you do. You can call us, you can email us, we go set up a Teams chat if you prefer that. It's definitely phone a friend here. Reach out to us. We're here to support you. And lastly, before we pass it over to questions again, is we really want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this session, to be here with us. And also thank you for everything that you do to support the teachers in your district and the students that you all serve. So we really appreciate you. Thank you so much. So any questions? Because now we're going to open it back up.
I don't have a question, Katie, but I have an update. Oh,
All right, update.
Well, thank you, Deirdre and Katie, for that awesome coverage there. I do want to mention Alec. I don't know if Alec is still here, but for those of you that heard the question, I don't know that he is actually, about the manuals not being updated for NGSS and CTAA on the comprehensive portal. We did confirm they weren't updated, but they're updated now. So one other reason number 1,233 why Cambium is great. They've updated those, and you'll find the links there now if you go to them are live and updated. And we are working on our CTAS one just because one of the challenges this year for us, and as I'm sure you all are enduring, is making sure our materials are fully accessible, and it does take a little more TLC to process our materials. So that should be updated in the next week or so. That would be CTAS.
And Abe, just really quick, if you go on to the portal and you're still seeing the old version, clear your browsing history and then check again.
And one more, speaking of plugs, we will be, again, as we mentioned this at the beginning, but we will be releasing next week the PowerPoint version of this slide deck, the audio video recording of the slide of this presentation, as well as the teacher training deck. We'll send an email to DA. So if you are not the DA, please alert your DA to watch out for that if you want to just be alerted to that. And that should be, I don't want to promise a day, but I'll promise a week, and I'll say next week. And before everybody drops, I do also want to thank everybody for attending today, to echo what Katie and Deirdre had mentioned. Any questions? Oh. David, I see you coming in here. I'll allow, you should be able to unmute now. Go ahead.
Yes. Hey, Abe. Hi, everybody. Asked it in the chat before, is there a way to batch upload designated supports, or do I have to enter them one by one for each child?
David, you can absolutely use the batch upload process. So the answer is yes. And I'm going to pop in the chat the link that walks you through that process. And you can also use the TIE user guide as reference as far as how to do that batch upload. So just give me 2 seconds and I'll post that in the chat.
That's
and David,
amazing.
you'll just want to make sure that when you're doing that batch upload, that you've removed all the records for students who have an IDEA or 504 indicator.
Yes.
You take them out and then you batch load everybody else in. You're good.
you're saying just remove all of those students, only add information for the students who are not in those categories.
Yes, because
Yes.
the students who have the IDA and 504 indicator, those automatically sync from CT
Who have
sets to
been-
Tide,
right.
and you don't want to
Yep.
override that. So
No, I don't.
yeah, nope, not fun.
No, we're very grateful for the sync. The sync has
Yes,
led to
awesome.
lots of ease and minimized issues and my errors. And yes, awesome. Thank you so much for the good news. Has this always been
welcome.
here and I've just been the slow guy?
You know what, David? It is all okay. You know,
There's so much.
there's so much to know. This is only one small piece of the work that you do. So seriously, like, just if any of you have a doubt about something or a question, or you're wondering about a resource, just reach out to us. We'll help you out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like Lydia.
Hi. So just a question about a student who has a 504 plan, who does not have text to speech in their 504 plan. However, they might also be in the MTSS world, and it's recommended by the team for them to have text to speech for their math. I feel like in that moment, we do need to override what is being, coming over through CT SEDS.
So that comes into where that CT SEDS document is the agreement between the district, the family, and the student of what that student should have. So that is something that you're then going against what is in writing for that agreement with that parent. So really what is in CT SEDS is the truth, and that
Okay.
determination for that student.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the
You're welcome.
clarification.
And I would just add, I mean, Katie is
Mhm.
my go-to on these things. But if there ever is a need for the team to reconvene and have a
Yes.
conversation about maybe taking away an accessibility support or adding one
adding it
based
in.
on practices that you're currently using, that you're finding that the text to speech, the student is responding very well to the text to speech, then,
back.
you know, you can schedule a reconvening and amend the plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Because it sounded like that might be what the student needs. So if, like Deirdre said, if your student's meeting with success with that, and that is an access point for them, then that should be documented in their plan.
That makes sense. I think we use AimsWeb, and so that is something that's built into for all students during that testing. So I think it just hasn't really come up.
So that's something that, you're looking at what you're doing in the district testing. And that usually is like when you're like you're trialing those supports. Is that support the right fit? So if the team's feeling that that support is the right fit and that student really is utilizing it and utilizing that with success, and it's reducing that student's barriers based on the nature of their disability or their learning profile, then that's when because you are trialing it at the district level right now, and or at the tier 1, tier 2 level, if that really is the right fit for that student, then that's when you want to go in and reconvene and say, you know what, this really is the right fit. We have data to substantiate this is the right fit for this student, and add that into the plan.
Thank you.
Yep.
I don't see any. Oh, Lydia. I did drop in the chat. Thanks, Katie, for that. Someone had emailed about the location of our manuals. Again, this goes back to the CTAA and the science manuals that Alec brought up. That's off the comprehensive portal. That's kind of our master site, and that's where the team is working on updating CTOS. We're almost there. That should be there any moment. Okay, I guess we'll call it a workshop. Thanks to my colleagues, Deirdre and Katie, for doing an awesome job updating us. And thank you all for spending a few hours with us this morning. Good luck on the assessment window. reach out to us if you need anything, and have a safe weekend when the storm comes.
I
Thanks,
echo that,
everyone.
Abe. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
We appreciate your partnership.
Mhm.